that you're gonna look great. But if you wanna stay in shape, well, you better hit the Gymwits.
That's right, man. Tell 'em.
Welcome to the Gymwits podcast. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, a.k.a. Chef Sonic.
And I'm Toni Marinucci, a.k.a. Tips with Toni, your registered dietitian.
And we are the Gymwits. Somehow when it's the three of us, my brain doesn't register that I always say, and we are the Gymwits. And so I'm always like, kind of stuck, paused, without anything to say. But yeah, Justin, so tell everybody about your weird plan.
Well, it's not a plan. I'm just ashamed, or I was ashamed to talk to Emmeline because I've been eating meat. So I didn't want her to judge me, even though I know intellectually that she doesn't do that and she's going to be okay with everything. I'm still ashamed.
Yeah, well, I guess a little context. We're interviewing Emmeline Peaches, who's been on the podcast before, and she's in one of the episodes we actually talked about veganism, and she's a vegan. Justin. Recently, if you're a big listener of the podcast, you'll know all this stuff. If not, maybe you've listened to some and not others. Justin decided to switch over to vegan-ish, or mostly
I was
vegan,
vegetarian.
Or vegetarian. Okay, vegetarian. And for reasons, he's come back to eating meat. He's come back to the light. And so he's ashamed, and he did not want to say anything. I think it was just like attention seeking, kind of like by his absence, kind of conspicuous by his absence. Emmeline would ask, "Where's Justin?" Because she wouldn't hear from him for the entire podcast, and you guys could listen and hear how that played out. Not very well.
Quite interesting.
All right. Well, anyway, I guess we'll get right to it. It's a fun interview. We discuss a fairly serious topic with a little moment of levity. When Justin, well, I'll just let you guys listen.
Yeah.
So without
definitely
further
a serious
ado,
topic. Definitely a serious topic.
Definitely a very serious topic.
Moment, but yeah, it's a very serious topic.
All right. Well, without further ado, here's Emmeline Peaches. So we're here with Emmeline Peaches. Emmeline, how are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Yourselves?
Oh, great. I'm doing really well. So this is a first, I think. This is your third time on the podcast. So I think you were tied with somebody else for 2, but I think now you have the record for most appearances on the Gymwits podcast. So congratulations!
Oh my gosh.
For what it's worth.
I feel honored. Thank you.
She's awesome.
I'm blessed. Thank you. I'm blushing.
How was your marathon?
Oh, it was brilliant. Yeah, it went really, really well, and the route was absolutely lovely. I couldn't have asked for a better marathon, to be honest with you. And I beat my previous time. Not that I go for time, but I beat it by about 45, coming up to 50 minutes, I think. So yeah, huge.
That's huge.
Yeah, I know. A bit drastic.
Did you do anything different with your training because 45 minutes is huge. Did you do anything different as far as getting prepared for this one?
Oh, completely different. Yeah. So for this one, I actually trained, which I do hear helps. For the previous one, the aspiration was to train, but and I'll actually bring it up later in our discussion. Leading into my first marathon, I was actually struggling with an eating disorder, so it was a bit harder to get around the course. But so this time, having now recovered, it's probably helped a lot, and also the actual putting in the training, doing it sensibly, and all of the good things that we recommend when someone wants to run a marathon.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, cool. I guess that's a great segue into our discussion. So today we're going to talk about eating disorders. And I guess before we really get into the science and the statistics and the information that you and also Toni can share with us, can you tell us a little bit about your own personal experience with eating disorders and kind of how it steered you into the kind of path you're on now?
I absolutely can, yes. I'd obviously want to put out a little bit of a disclaimer that obviously for anyone who is currently struggling with an eating disorder or who thinks they might have some issues, this might be distressing content, but I also feel that it's quite helpful content, and I think that it can be quite empowering content as well, because what I will say is that there is a way out, and there are systems in place that can help you. So, and I'm going to hopefully be able to talk about some of that today, but for me, my eating disorder, it stemmed from quite a surprising place, because it came while I was physically in quite a good place with my body and with my performance. but mentally I was struggling. So I would consider it to be one of the low mental health points in my life. I've previously had issues with anxiety and depression, as I'm sure many people have. 1 in 4 people, they believe now. I was in a good place with that, but I was in quite an abusive relationship at the time, and that was really hurting my self-esteem. And then I actually had my first incident of food-related binging when I actually got a hormonal contraceptive inserted into my body. I don't want to discourage anyone from trying it, the coil specifically. And the binge was quite a shock at the time because I was seeing a dietitian. My body was in a good place. I was regulating my life. And then all of a sudden I had this binge, and it was crazy and scary, but also quite an empowering thing in a difficult time in my life, because the food that I had binged on was food that I enjoyed, and and in the start it felt like this amazing, yummy, delicious thing, because who out of us doesn't every now and then just go a little bit crazy with some food that they absolutely love? And so when it happened a few more times, I wasn't alarmed, but then gradually I started to realize I was losing control of that. I was losing control of my relationship with my food. And then as a result, I was trying to deprive myself of food during times when I shouldn't. And as things were getting worse in my relationship, food and my body became things I was trying to control my life through in a negative way. And the more I wanted to shrink away emotionally, the more I was trying to shrink away physically as well. And obviously, when we starve our body, it's trying to survive. So eventually you will start consuming food. And it was probably a healthy amount of food calorie-wise. But when you feel like you don't have control, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's when it became more distressing. So it eventually got to a point where I said to myself, I need help. And I went to the doctors that day, and I went to a peer support group in the area and basically tried to sort it out as soon as I possibly could. And thus started my road to recovery from quite a dark period, actually.
It's not uncommon, like what you just said. A lot of times eating disorders usually stem from either mental illness or just a stressful time in life, because like you said, food is the one thing that we can control, and it becomes like that easy kind of escape mechanism that we can utilize. So I mean, you should be proud of yourself for getting help as soon as you did. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I completely agree. What most people don't recognize when it comes to eating disorders is that really it's not about technically the body, and it's not about the food. It's about the fact that we are seeking a negative coping tactic to deal with things we can't control in life. And it just so happens that food and body image are the things that we've focused on. And sadly, it's so easy to do so in our current society, because we are so focused on problematic eating or bodily or behavioral patterns when it comes to that aspect of our lives.
Your body is the most tangible thing that we can focus on. It's like to be honest, it's more of an easy out. Like, you're really saying I'm sad or I'm depressed or I'm anxious, but you don't really even know why. Sometimes there's not even a real reason. So being able to like take it out on your body is just like it's there, it's available. So that's why people do it. But it might not be even what they want to do. It's just the only thing they know how to do to help them feel better.
Completely. And I think to some degree we do, even those with a healthy relationship with food, we seek out food as comfort, and we do prescribe quite a lot of positive relationships to it. And even those who don't have eating disorders might have disordered eating behaviors, and it's just where that goes in life and how we feel about that and our relationship with it.
I think disordered eating is more common than eating disorders.
Definitely. Sometimes there's a fine line though, and it hurts to diagnose this. One of the things that really troubles me is that oftentimes it seems like there is no path towards help until you have actually got to that point of going past disordered eating and getting into a full-on eating disorder, whereas really we want to try and help people with their relationship with their food as early on as we
where's the line
possibly
if somebody
can.
doesn't really know much about the subject? Like, where is the line between, you know, kind of what's considered disordered eating versus like what can be diagnosed as an eating disorder?
Toni could probably speak to this better than I could, having the basis as a registered dietitian. But there are a set of psychological criteria and physiological criteria in some cases that you need to meet in order to be diagnosed with certain eating disorders. So the eating disorders that are currently recognised in the UK, as far as I know, are anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and then we have OSFED, which is otherwise specified feeding or eating disorders, which is what people basically get clustered into when they're showing some of the symptoms for some of the other eating disorders, but don't meet all of the criteria. How about Toni? Do you have any more to elaborate on that?
I would definitely agree. Like, there are clear, like, there is a diagnosis criteria. But I think for layman's terms, for people, I think when they need to know when they really, really need to get help is if it's taking over your life. Like, if it's literally to the point where you're not socializing, where you're feeling sick every day, where you feel completely out of control and you can't even like go to work or go to school, or it's just all you think about and obsess about, that's really where we want to really get help. Another diagnosis that they're going to start to put into the criteria that they haven't yet is orthorexia, which you could probably do an entire podcast about. And but in short, orthorexia is, the intention is not about the weight, like, so it's not about getting to a certain weight. So although people might have symptoms that appear of someone who's anorexic, who decreases their calorie intake, it's more of just about being obsessed with having their food to be absolutely perfect and healthy, and knowing where the source comes from, to a point where they can't go out and socialize with their friends or family members because they don't know where that chicken came from, and it makes them, literally, it just like drives them insane all day long. And because they don't know, it's not the most healthy, perfect item, they can't consume it. And that's more like orthorexia. So a lot of it has to do with the mindset behind it, and then the symptoms. To be honest, I worked in an eating disorder clinic for 2 years. My first job being as a registered dietitian, I was an outpatient. Yeah, and what's the most interesting thing I find with eating disorders is not everyone have a mental, like physiologically, they might not look like someone with anorexia, but their mental state is someone with anorexia. And like you were saying earlier, if we don't interject early on, eventually might more than likely will get to a state where it's unsafe and unhealthy. And then not only do we have to fix their mental health, but then we now have to fix their physical health. And it's always better for early intervention. So if anyone's listening, this is definitely something that we might be saying things that might trigger you. But if anything that we're saying is bringing something up, definitely reach out to get help. And there's no shame in getting help. And the sooner you get help, the faster you can recover. And I'm pretty sure, Emmeline, you're going to talk to the things that kind of helped you through it. And we could probably help.
Yeah, and I can completely agree. Obviously, eating disorders by nature are quite an isolating condition, as most mental illnesses are. They make you try and hide and obscure your behavior, partly out of just fear and heavily out of shame as well. You feel quite ashamed that these behaviors that you know that you wouldn't ever fathom in your normal daily lives are suddenly part of how you act, and you don't want anyone to recognize that. And there does, to some degree, a lot of people with eating disorders are worried that people are judging how they eat or judging how they might not eat. And this idea of others monitoring your food and how you're eating and bodily appearance looks to others can become quite a ingrained part of an eating disorder. But one of the things that people, that charities use and that other institutes use as an easy indicator for those initial questions of do I maybe have an eating disorder is known as the SCOFF questionnaire. So SCOFF. So you don't have to meet all of the criteria, but the questions simply are: do you make yourself sick because you feel uncomfortably full? Do you worry you've lost control over how much you eat? Have you recently lost 1 stone in a 3-month period? Again, body isn't all that goes into it, but it's something that you might consider. Do you believe yourself to be fat when others say that you're too thin or that you're not fat? And do you think that food dominates your life? And if you can say yes to 2 or above, then you might need to look further into your relationship with food, your body, and whether or not you might have a problematic eating pattern.
So what are I guess some of the red flags that whether you're somebody maybe dealing with it or somebody on the outside, like what are some of the things that you should be looking for? I guess another question would be kind of how do some of the disorders kind of manifest themselves from somebody again on the outside or from on the inside who maybe isn't as self-aware? Like what are those red flags?
It's good that you point that out because it is so hard to tell these symptoms sometimes, and a lot of people don't actually know them. So actually more than 1 in 3 adults in the UK, when they took a 2018 survey recently, couldn't name a single symptom of an eating disorder, which is problematic for anyone who might be struggling or for anyone who cares about someone who might be struggling. And I think the important thing to look for is their relationship with their food, how they're treating it. Perhaps you haven't seen them eat recently, or perhaps when they do eat, it's very, very restricted. They might play with their food. When they look at themselves, they might actually start grabbing at their body, or they might show a discontentment. There might be a dissatisfaction with the way that they look that they keep on saying. They might be irritable. They might be tired. They may wear clothing that is too big for them in order to try and hide their body. This is particularly common among someone who has anorexia. And again, more to the point, it's the mental aspect of it. So there might be low self-worth, stress, a certain amount of fear that is shown when it comes to the idea of eating or not eating certain foods, or eating or not eating at certain times. They might show fear at others seeing them eat. And these are the signs that we can start to see when it comes to eating disorders or potential eating disorders, where obviously they, or at least in my experience, I didn't feel like I was good enough, and self-worth played into it quite a lot. And people might feel like, or can continue saying that they're just not good enough, they're not eating the right things, they're not looking the right way, or just in life, they're not performing the right way.
So,
Justin's been here, but he's been weird. So we have to introduce Justin to the podcast.
Yeah, so this made the whole last 20 minutes kind of annoying because Justin's been ashamed to talk, and he was hoping that you'd ask why he's ashamed to talk. So now we're going to segue away from our topic for this dumb little thing that Justin wants to do.
Why are you ashamed to talk, Justin?
I can't tell you.
Oh, go on.
Well, unfortunately,
it's a serious topic. We have to have an intermission here.
It's and I have a bunch of important questions I want to ask you too about this. But I'm just ashamed that I've started eating meat again.
I know. I've seen. You gave it a good effort, and you never know, you might change your eating patterns at some point in life.
I messed up my tummy, so I had to.
Yes, I was listening to a podcast while I was running when I discovered that, and I had this moment of just. I held my arms up into the sky like, no, why? Yeah. No, it's okay.
Yeah.
It happens.
I felt bad about that. I've been that was the you were the first person I thought of when I started eating meat again. I was like, oh, Elaine's not going to be very happy with me.
Oh. Oh, bless you. No, but your eating standards and your eating habits do not have to conform
Okay.
to my preferences.
Well, well, I have an important question. Back to the topic at hand. So, what about, or what would you have to say to someone that looks at an eating disorder and says, "Wow, what a first world problem! We have this abundance of food, and yet someone's starving themselves, or someone's purging, or people just don't have self control, or something like that." What would you tell someone who shares or who has that belief, or a group of people that might share that belief?
That's an interesting question. I think to some degree, our current relationship with mental health and mental health awareness in general, not just eating disorders, is, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, a first world privilege, if not a problem. We are in a position where we are not struggling day to day with such hardships that we can actually sit down and take the time to address our mental health, whereas some people might not even have that chance. And in that way, if we then notice that we do have problems, that is a problem that has come about within our first world environment. So I guess there is a certain accuracy to that assertion, but it's not necessarily a negative thing, because it means that we can address and help ourselves in ways that others might not have the privilege to be able to do, which is important. In terms of willpower and, these people are just lacking in willpower, the thing is that with people with eating disorders, one of the things that you'll typically notice about the mental pattern, and it's even considered to be one of the things to keep an eye on in terms of the diagnosis from BEAT, the UK mental health charity, people with eating disorders tend to be perfectionists. Sometimes to a fault, definitely when it comes to food and body image. And there is an immense amount of willpower that is actually being exerted when someone is trying to, for example, deprive themselves of food for an entire day, or who are actually constantly thinking about this thing. There's a lot of will that goes into that. And to some degree, that is the problem, because when we say that people are or should depend on willpower, willpower is a finite resource. It's not something that we should rely on. It's not necessarily something that we're lacking in if we find ourselves failing, or if we consider ourselves to be at fault with our willpower. Nobody can exert power for an indefinite amount of time. I mean, power by definition is an exertion of force, and we can only exert force for so long until we have to have a break. And people who are struggling with an eating disorder and do find that they are seeking help, to me, they are the people who have actually taken a brave step and realized that they're going to burn themselves out if they're constantly relying on this willpower, and that it's not a failing of character if you can't hold yourself in an unhealthy situation, first of all, but in any situation, just by willpower alone, because we don't get anywhere successful with that. The successful way to move forward in anything, and that's including an eating disorder, eating disorders or mental health, is to look towards creating and then maintaining positive habits, sustainable habits that we can bring into our everyday lives, and that will actually help us where willpower isn't something that we can always rely on.
So, can you tell us a little bit more, go deeper into your own recovery? Like, how were you able to recover from it? And I guess also, how do you maintain that? Because like with anything, I'm sure, it's always a work in progress. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about the steps you took, how you got help, and what you continue to do to maybe make sure that you don't fall back into that.
Yes, of course. So for me, the moment that I acknowledged to myself that it was a problem, I acknowledged it to everyone around me. So I really opened up, and not everyone will be able to do this. And there is no shame if you cannot take that step to opening up and communicating. But I do believe that it is a very powerful and a very helpful way to get those first bits of care that you need and treatment that you need. But I also then turned to, I've mentioned them just briefly now, Beat, the UK eating disorder charity, and I looked at any local resources and help services that might be in place. And through that, I actually found a local peer support group, which is a godsend because unfortunately, the NHS, our National Health Service, is a wonderful, amazing service, and I cannot fault them in any way, but they're a very stressed service. So there isn't actually too much in the way of medical help and support for those struggling with eating disorders. So peer-based support groups were really what helped me get through those initial struggles. And I still go to one, even though I consider myself in a currently recovered state. I still go to my local one every single fortnight, and I still maintain a relationship with Beat, the UK eating disorder charity, and even do some work for them. But another thing that was really crucial for me was that when I did finally admit to myself that I had a problem, I had a marathon to run in less than a month. And I was actually doing that marathon and raising money for that marathon in honor of my nan, who sadly passed away from cancer. So for me, it was a case of not just this eating disorder will kill me if I don't recover, but also I really want to do this thing in my life, which I feel will help honor the memory of someone I cared about. And I know that in my current state, I will not be able to do that. I'm not going to say it's impossible to run a marathon while struggling with an eating disorder, but it's a very, very difficult task. Your body needs food to get through something like that. Your body needs to be functioning. You need to nourish yourself. There is nothing wrong, and I'm going to say that for anyone right now who is struggling with an eating disorder, there is nothing wrong with nourishing your body and with giving it the energy that it needs to get through, not necessarily a marathon, but definitely the day. We need to be able to get through the day. So knowing that I had this event coming up, I really, really tried to buckle down and use that as a focal point for that initial recovery and for that initial discomfort that I knew I was going to have when it came to sort of restoring my eating pattern and my relationship with my body to something more normal. And from there, from that experience, I would say that was a very strong defining moment in not only my eating disorder recovery, but also obviously where I've gone forward in my life. And I think that it got me to recognize that my body is capable of so much, and it comes down to so much more than just the number on the scales or how it looks in the mirror or something like that, which can to some degree matter, but is such a minute part of our lives. And for me, the experiences that I have in life are now something that I cherish and where I can take things.
So shifting gears a little bit, what about the media, social media, the diet industry, fitness industry, everything, all of those entities? Do you believe that they play a role in eating disorders that people might have, whether it's comparing yourself to others, wanting to look a certain way, being obsessed with the diet trend, anything along those lines? Do you think that plays into the issues at hand?
Absolutely. 100%. I'm not going to completely throw social media under the bus because it's also a great tool for recovery if used correctly. But just like anything, you can use it positively or you can abuse it horrendously. And sadly, we are in, when it comes to fitness, it is an industry that values to some degree, especially in terms of social media presence and putting yourself out there and marketing yourself in a certain way, looks. There is a lot of the fitness industry that is targeting the obesity crisis that we have now, which is, again, it's valid. But if you're someone with an eating disorder, you might not recognize that when these people are talking about this 12-week transformation where it's all about losing body weight and stuff like that, it's not necessarily speaking to them, and they might still adopt it as something that they need to do because of body dysmorphia, even though technically they're already in a good place. They're not the target audience for that. And obviously, when it comes to seeing many of the fitness shots, we're looking at people's, the best of moments of their lives. And sometimes that can include the best of moments of their body. So you're looking at people, you're comparing, you're despairing. That's the common phrase as well. And it's something that you have to be mindful of and negate. But at the same time, we cannot say that it's the only factor of an eating disorder. There are so many different factors.
One thing I will say, though, because I do have personal clients who struggle with eating disorders, and they've, mentioned to me that sometimes looking in social media, it makes them feel, ashamed of their body because they're not what they see and they're working on it. And if whatever you're looking at doesn't make you feel good, unfollow them. Like, do not, like, that. The one
completely.
Good thing about social media is it can connect people in a positive way. So follow people that embrace, what you want to be, which is someone who's proud of their body no matter what it looks like, or who's healthy, who's taking care of themselves. I can't really say what that is for each person, because everyone believes, there's a different version of how they can be healthy in their mind, and that's fine. But the idea is, if people that you're following are making you feel less, ignore, just don't, if you have to digest and not be on social media for a little bit, do that. Whatever makes you feel good, that's what you want to do. If it doesn't make you feel good, get rid of it.
Yeah, I'd even go a step further and say, use social media to your advantage and own it. So identify and follow recovery or charity groups that will post up motivationals that can help you get through the day. And save any of the images that you find on there that you like. Keep them on your phone in a separate folder if you need to. And then when you're struggling, use those positive social media things that you have got to help you. And beyond that, start following other interests and passions that you care about and that you feel will drive you and motivate you in life, because at the end of the day, it's not all going to be about your eating disorder, and you want to move past that and see a life beyond it. And social media can help with that so much. But if you find yourself looking at an image and you can feel those problematic thoughts emerging, then it is important to unfollow if you need to.
Along the same lines, but I guess a little bit more specifically, do you think that the diet industry itself shoulders some of the blame for this? And then also, I'm assuming you're going to say yes, but if so, how do you steer the industry itself in the right direction without impacting profits? Because clearly, the industry makes a ton of money for practices that arguably really harm people. But how is there a way to steer it without again impacting the profits? I'd love to know what you think about that.
Yeah. So let's be completely realistic here and say that most of the companies that are selling weight reduction products are probably more interested in making the profit rather than necessarily helping the people who might struggle with an eating disorder, unfortunately. I hate to say that, and I love to think the best of people, but at the same time, I know it's realistic that people who are trying to make money will continue to want to make money. At the same time, I think that the best way to move forward, and I'm starting to see it in social media more now as well, and obviously in places like the Gymwits and Tips with Toni, is to try and move towards more of an idea of, if we do need to manage our weight in a certain way, if that is something we need to look at, let's think of it in terms of weight management and performance, what our bodies can do, and ways to build up our bodies and our lives in constructive manners rather than ways to shrink ourselves down. So I think a good way to go about it is not to think necessarily about shooting for weight loss, but to try and shoot for quality of life gain and the way that we can enrich our lives through seeking fitness. And the thing is that a thin body isn't necessarily a fit body. What we want is to be able to perform in life, especially when it comes to all of the things that matter, not just fitness, but being able to just enjoy the day without feeling tired or constantly thinking about food. So that was an interesting horn. But I think when these companies are trying to target people, it should be about making a body capable rather than making it slim.
we can hope for that. Hopefully, it's not just pie in the sky. Even though, sadly, I think that's what it is.
I'm looking outside. I can see the pie. It's just flying by along with the
I think as long as there are profits to be made, people or companies are going to use not the most scrupulous means, but maybe things will change if enough people, either stop buying products or really start protesting against them. But we'll see if that ever happens.
I'm going to add just. Big weight loss companies, if you're struggling with an eating disorder, I don't recommend seeking that as your solution. However, following registered dietitians that use the hashtag, if you're talking about social media, intuitive eating. Most dietitians who believe in intuitive eating is teaching people how to be mindful of their food choices, how to assess if they're hungry or full, how to, look at food as a way, is this going to, do I want this? Do I need this? It really just allows you to check in with yourself, and it's a different method that people use. And trust me, if you have a registered dietitian who specializes in intuitive eating, it's because they want to help you. It doesn't, yes, they need to make money, they are in business, but it's more because they want to help you. And I think that following, individuals who can relate to you, who've helped people similar to you, those are the type of people to seek versus, the big companies that, like you were saying, probably trying to get your money. That's not really going to help in any way. It's just going to put a Band-Aid on it until you get the real help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with and condone intuitive eating. I think it's a fantastic tool, and it's something that is encouraged quite a lot in eating disorder recovery. I also like to highlight that it's something that people with eating disorders often struggle with a lot. And sometimes it can be too big of an initial step. It's something to work towards. But the thing is, for someone with an eating disorder, they've spent so long either with their body in a state of complete deprivation or perhaps being overfull, that when they're trying to figure out their body's internal signals, they've blocked them out for so long. They don't necessarily know what it is. I mean, when I was trying to eat, I just didn't like the feeling of being full, even though for most people that is a good cue. Like the satisfied fullness, for me, that was too much at one point. And so you have to, a good rule of thumb for some people, and I'm not going to be able to recommend or speak to anyone's current individual situation, but this is something that some people employ, is just to eat every 4 hours or something like that. They'll work with a dietitian, and I do advise working with a dietitian if you can, a qualified one, and they'll find out a way to initially ease themselves into an eating pattern so that eventually their body can come back to that intuitive state. And when it does, it is scary and fantastic. And sometimes the hardest thing about recovering from an eating disorder is learning to trust your body again and learning to actually have
you said a very
relationship
important point, which is intuitive eating is like the big goal. In the beginning, when you work with the dietitian's going to meet you where you're at. They're going to work at very small goals. They're not going to force food down your throat. They're not going to expect you to never binge again or never purge again. Whatever you're struggling with, we know that it's a process and it takes time. But eventually, the ultimate goal is to be able to check in with yourself, know when you're hungry, know when you're full, eat when you want, not versus what you're trying to fight against, Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to say as well that sometimes you will slip up, and it's just a case of a lapse is not a collapse, and you can recover from that.
So I'm wondering something. Now, I don't have any experience with dealing or knowing anyone with an eating disorder, although I believe I have known people with it, but I've never... I don't want to use the word confront, but I've never brought it up to them as an issue. It was, I never saw a case that I felt warranted me saying anything, but I have certainly seen something similar to that, which is people that had struggled with alcohol or other substances, and bringing it up to them is a very, very sensitive topic. You see a few different responses. One is a big time denial, it's or downplay, like I don't have a problem. Yeah, it's like whatever, something like that. One is of anger, basically saying, mind your own business. It can, and one is sort of admitting and saying, yeah, you're right, I need to do this, but then never doing anything. So that's sort of things that I've noticed.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's similar for an eating disorder. I would think that it might be if you were to talk to someone about that.
Yeah.
So with that being said, if you have a friend or loved one that you believe is in trouble because of an eating disorder, is there a way to bring it up to them? And what might you expect besides some of the things that I just mentioned?
Ask them how they're doing in life. Just ask, how have you been recently? How are you handling things? How's life treating you? Again, oftentimes the eating disorder is a manifestation of a struggle. And if you go straight for those behavioral patterns that, again, a lot of people are ashamed of, they're gonna knee jerk, they're gonna hide, they might get angry, they might deny, they might panic. Again, it might even trigger a fight or flight or something internally, and they're just gonna seize up. But if you come to someone and you're just generally asking, so how have things been? Have you been struggling recently? Or I'm a bit worried about you because you're looking a bit tired, or just, and then let them talk. And if they don't come to it straight away, that's fine. You don't have to mention food or their body. To some degree, that's not even where you want to target your focus. Your focus is on their mental health and well-being, and allowing them the space to open up in their own time about that can sometimes be a crucial point. Because if someone came up to me while I was struggling, before I came out personally, I would not have told them. I just wouldn't have. I was so scared. I was so ashamed, and it's so counter to everything else that you know about yourself and every other way that you present yourself, that to some degree you don't want to confront it yourself, and you definitely don't want others to be pointing it out to you.
So if someone does come out and say, yes, I need some sort of help, what can you recommend? I know you had mentioned the peer groups. I guess that's the main source of treatment. Is there any other treatment? Is that what would you recommend if someone was asking you, where should I go for help?
I would advise that they go and see their local medical professional. So here we can go to the NHS, but obviously whatever the US equivalent would be, I would recommend that definitely, because sometimes you may not be able to get immediate help with that, but you need to flag it as soon as possible. From there, I would say look online at the certified, recognized charities in your country or area. See what they can do or provide to help you with. See what reading they recommend. They might have podcasts. They might have other endorsed things that you can use. And also, I would suggest that you could recommend to them that maybe they could see a dietitian, a registered dietitian, if they're in the position to do so.
This might be an ignorant question, but are these eating disorders, and I don't remember if you had touched on this earlier, are these actually clinically or a medical, sort of medically accepted as a problem, so that you would go see a doctor for this and it's accepted as a medical condition?
Yes, as long as they take you through the criteria and you're diagnosed and you meet the criteria, then yes. Other than that, if you still feel like you're struggling but you're not meeting all of the criteria and the doctors don't think that they can offer you support systems because of that particular reason, there is nothing to stop you from going to a peer support group, from calling a help charity, from reading the books that you need, from seeking out a dietitian who has experience with this and saying, I have a disordered relationship with food and I do feel like I need help. So whereas you may not get full medical support, there are definitely loads of support systems in place that you can take sort of advantage of. And if there aren't, you could always be proactive and look into maybe starting your own. I mean, our group specifically started because there was someone in the area who recognized that there wasn't much in the way of peer support for us, and so simply started it up.
I do find that when people are in charge of helping other people while helping themselves, they're more likely to actually help themselves. And when it comes to recovering from something like an eating disorder or improving their health and wellness. And then one other thing I just want to add is usually, it's very uncommon. My clients also are in therapy. You should also seek a therapist, because there's usually, Emmeline, you said you were struggling with depression and anxiety, and this is just how it manifested. Sometimes it's, an undiagnosed, which we realized later end up being diagnosed with OCD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or just really, really stressed out from work and from life and learning to manage those in a healthier way. A dietitian can help with your food, but there are certain things that we cannot do, and that's where a therapist is able to help in that area. And it usually all works together.
Absolutely, and cognitive behavioral therapy has such a good success rate, I think, especially because it does foster those positive habits and focus on sort of noticing and trying to veer away from the negative coping tactics that we've employed in a poor mental health state.
So I guess I have a question. It almost really doesn't matter based on everything that we've talked about, but as a vegan, has this played any role on the eating, or were you a vegan at the time? So
I was, yes.
Did it affect you in any way, or similarly, if you know about this, do certain diets or eating, I don't want to say restrictive, but what your preferred diet or what you eat, is there any correlation between that and an eating disorder? Say if someone is vegan or if someone only is paleo or something like that, do we know if there's any connection between the two?
For me personally, my veganism didn't come into it. And the reason for that is because obviously veganism, I don't know if I brought this up in the previous podcast on it, but veganism's kind of taken a funny turn in that technically veganism isn't a dietary movement, it's an ethical movement, and diet is just one part of it. And so for me, it never played into it because I never really looked at my veganism as a diet. It was just an ethical framework in which certain food groups were and certain food groups weren't. And so the foods that I started to binge on and the foods I continued to starve myself or binge on were always vegan foods. And it wasn't even a consideration for me. But definitely those who are looking at coming into veganism or see veganism purely as the plant-based diet that vegans employ, they can use it or any other diet.
Like my experience is usually, especially in teenagers, like the first step is, because it's easier, no one will question them if they say I'm a vegetarian or I'm a vegan. They're able to they can easily exclude the food groups. It becomes restrictive already because it's it is restrictive, and so that is definitely something to look out for.
It's absolutely something to look out for. And I've known people in my peer support group who went to veganism as something that they could use, or at least the plant-based diet as something that they could use to restrict more food. And they've even said to me now, I love the ethical side of veganism, but I'm just not sure with my eating disorder if it's a safe thing to return to right now. And I've said to them, don't tackle that. Don't worry about that. Worry about your recovery. Do not get into anything that you feel might jeopardize that. And certainly if you're looking at any diet, keto, vegan, paleo, vegan keto, which just sounds like hell to me, but some people do it. I love my carbs too much. But if you are looking at any diet and your main thinking behind actually adopting it isn't this will sustain me healthily in the long term, but rather this is going to help me restrict my food or cut my weight, then you might need to assess whether or not that is a sensible path to go down, especially if you know you struggle with problematic eating.
Definitely.
Cool.
Also, might I just say that any sort of situation where you are also going down diet that condone 20 calorie 2 hour depressing items as part of a healthy routine, I would also suggest that is not.
You guys haven't heard of the algae diet?
Oh no.
So,
oh god. I lament.
I guess shifting gears a little bit. Obviously, your first interview with us, we were talking about your website where you review adult products. So before we sign off, are there any interesting developments in the adult product world, or any interesting things that have come out, or anything interesting in that world for you?
Always. I believe that there is now a nice and increasing focus on male Kegel tools, which will be of use to some people. Definitely fitness enthusiasts.
It's funny because sorry to interrupt you, but I told Ryan well over a year ago that we should do a podcast on the whole Kegel thing. It's important.
I know.
It is.
It's a fascinating topic. It is. And I do think that you should do an episode about it at some point. But there's also a lot of shift towards sex technology, integrating it with our mobile phones. And also, I'm sure you cannot have failed to miss that there are a lot of life-size dolls now that are going on the market with artificial intelligence or similar. And the adult industry are playing into that and seeing where they can take that as well. So, yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
The models that they can use right now aren't necessarily the most convincing thing, but it's an interesting ethical and moral debate alongside everything else.
Looks like we're gonna have you on for a fourth time.
Should be the fourth. You should just join the team. Fourth gymwit.
Oh, well, I am a qualified fitness and gym instructor now. Would you believe? I know. I literally passed yesterday. So you are.
Out of curiosity, what's the requirements in the UK?
We are mostly unregulated, so literally anyone could claim to be a personal trainer. I'm not sure if it's the same in the US.
Trainer.
Wait, is it really?
Well, no. I should say it's so in the US. There are a number of certifying bodies, but you have about 3 to 5 that are respected. So if you go to any regular, any kind of higher end gym, most businesses are going to require one of the 3 to 5, but there are dozens of others, and anyone can just say, hey, here, I'm certifying trainers. Like, there's no government regulation as far as what you need to
in fact, if you write into the Gymwits with a $468 check, we will certify you as a personal trainer. Ryan will, for sure.
Yeah, sure.
That's it, certified. Job's done. The way I went for it was an MVQ. That is a qualification that's done through the YMCA here. So you take your level 2, which is just fitness and gym instructor. That allows you to actually be in a gym instructing people how to use the equipment and giving just the general guidelines for nutrition. From there, I will then go on to do a specific level 3 in personal training. And come the end of the year, I will hopefully be a personal trainer, fingers crossed. So that's the route that I've taken. And I believe that is the most recommended one. But obviously, there are so many other ways that people can do it. They can do online courses. They can do intensive courses. They can go with a gym. Gyms will offer apprenticeships and they will go through certain bodies. But this is definitely the most legitimate method that you can use. So, yeah, yesterday I I got that level 2 qualification, and the Sunday just gone, I also ran a half marathon, so it's been a busy week
That's
for
awesome.
me.
That's great news. Definitely will keep us updated on how things go with, with the
Thank
training.
Will do, definitely. And keep me updated if you've got a Kegel episode planned.
For sure.
And the What the Health episode, and God knows how many other health and
we have to
diet
do that, of
documentaries
course.
that are coming out nowadays. Yeah, I think you best conglomerate them at this point into just a documentary.
Ryan's going to do a video for the Kegel episode. So we'll leave everyone with that that thought. And thank you, Emmeline, as always, for coming on the Gymwits. You're the best. And good luck with everything.
So much
and I'm sure we'll have you on very soon. Awesome.
Bye, Emmeline.
Thank you.
Yes, have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
So Ryan didn't really mean it was a fun interview. I mean, everything with Emmeline is always awesome and good. I think you just meant that was a funny moment, right? In sort of
I guess so. I don't know. I mean,
you tried to make it funny, but it really didn't work.
It didn't work. And my language skills aren't all that great, so sometimes when I'm like, if I'll say it's a fun interview, I just mean it was a good interview. We had a good time. It was insightful. But so sometimes I just use fun in place of other more appropriate words. So that was it.
Well, more importantly, if this interview impacted you in any way, whether it's something you can relate to or someone, I hope that gives some insight into how to go about either getting help for someone. You can always write to us for support. We will always do our best to lend a hand in whichever way we can.
Definitely. I would say if you need any help, send me an email, tipswithtoni@gmail.com, or contact me on the Gymwits website. And depending on where you live, I could probably find a decent resource depending on where you're from. So just make sure you put that and include that when you write in.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess that is it. All of our social media stuff can be found at thegymwits.com, including the podcast and links to anything you need. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all that good stuff. If you haven't yet, please fill out our survey at survey.lisbon.com/thegymwits. And where can people find you, Toni?
On Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube. And I actually just relaunched my website, www.tipswithtoni.com. It looks really cool.
Awesome. And we'll leave Emmeline's stuff. I totally blanked on asking her to mention her social media, but if you want to get in touch with her, definitely check the show notes. And that is it. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic, reminding you that truth does not sell.
And I'm Toni Marinici, aka Tips with Toni, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.
And we are
Gymwits.